So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jill Nimchek with the Wisconsin Out of School Time Alliance. We are a program of the Marshfield Clinic region of Sanford Health. So I really want to welcome you today to our webinar on AI adventures. So this is empowering out of school time, STEM or STEAM with ChatGPT or other kind of AI services. This webinar is a part of our STEAM series that we've been doing, where we aim to support youth and their families and supplement your STEAM or STEM programming. I really hope that you leave here today with a few more tools to help you navigate this topic with greater confidence. So this series is made possible through a partnership between WASTA, or the Wisconsin Out of School Time Alliance, and the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. So I am pleased to announce our speaker today, who is Bernie Travasari, and I'm going to throw it over to Bernie so he can tell you his background and introduce you to himself and this great topic.
Thanks so much, Jill, and hi, everyone. So great to have you all here today. As Jill mentioned, my name is Bernie, and I'm a STEM education consultant for the Wisconsin Out of School Time Alliance. My background is mostly in biology and conservation, but over the last 3 to 4 years, I've been working a lot in community-based science education programs, specifically in Wisconsin. So this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. I have mostly worked with out-of-school time programs, mostly worked with family-based programs in a variety of different STEM fields and for a variety of different STEM projects. And only recently, I've started to delve into the AI world and trying to incorporate some AI tools into program development. And I've seen other partners do the same. So I'm hoping that this session is useful for everyone. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay. So I'm assuming everyone can see my screen? Yes, great. So the goal of today's session, and I will preface this by saying that there's a lot to talk about in terms of AI tools and ChatGPT and how they can be used. There are entire workshops and webinar series out there that cover these tools in a lot more detail than I will today. The goal today is to do really 3 things. One, introduce the basic mechanics of tools like ChatGPT. How do they work, right? How do we get the outputs that we usually get when we try utilizing ChatGPT? 2, how can we use these? What are some common prompts that we can utilize as part of out-of-school time programs, or if you are a K through 12 teacher within your own classroom, right? And then 3, what are some limitations, let's call them limitations and constraints, that we should keep in mind as we're utilizing these programs? Because even though they are great, they are certainly not perfect. And I think there's a couple of not issues, but details that should be kept in mind as you're utilizing these programs, whether they're part of an out-of-school time STEM project, or whether they're part of your K through 12 classroom projects. Okay. So to get started, I want to get some gut reactions. When you hear the term artificial intelligence or AI tool or something similar, what comes to mind? And we'll do this for like a couple of minutes. Feel free to unmute yourselves to share your gut reactions, or share them through the chat. 1 or 2 words works. I want to see what comes to mind initially. I love that. Nikki said, not a huge fan, but it is out there, so might as well learn about it, right? Yeah. Comprehension, that's a good one. What else?
I think that artificial intelligence is subjective to Yeah, just subjective. It could be either good or it could be used for bad.
I love it, Kayla. Thank you. Yes, that's a great point. Yeah. And we'll touch a little bit more about that later on. Michelle, time saver. I like that too. Yeah, that is a great point too. There's a lot of tools, AI-based tools out there that are meant to be that are meant to make work more efficient in a variety of different ways. And that includes ChatGPT, but there's also more specialized ones like creating emails, right? Or scheduling. All of those are AI-based tools that in some way or shape or form help with efficiency. Yep, exactly. A lot of us use it with daily things like Alexa, Google Assistant. Yep, pretty much every conceivable daily technological tool is now incorporating AI in some way. So even if we're not using a tool like ChatGPT, we might still be using AI just in different ways, in ways that we can't really perceive. And I love that one of our other comments is, I just got introduced to ChatGPT and I think it's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, so these are all great reactions. Thank you all so much for contributing to this interactivity. Artificial intelligence elicits a lot of emotions, right? And a lot of initial reactions. Some of those are great. Others are not so great. Myself, when I was first introduced to ChatGPT, when it came out, I think it was like 4 years ago, I had a lot of skepticism. I didn't really understand the hype behind this tool. I didn't really understand all of the claims the creators are making about the way it was going to change things. And over the last few years, that I've seen being implemented in a variety of different ways, I've started to look at it in a different light. And for sure, the tools themselves have made huge strides over the last few years, but I think there's still a lot of ground to cover, especially to meet some of those initial claims. But this is all great. I'm glad to know where we're all starting from today. Cool. So as a really brief introduction to just general artificial intelligence and education, regardless of how we see every independent tool, I think it is important to recognize that artificial intelligence has revolutionized education in a number of different ways, specifically by making it more interactive and by leading to a lot more tools for personalized learning. I think if you search the literature and you search the available tools out there that include artificial intelligence, specifically for education, these are the two areas that they are present in the most. That's interactive activities and personalized learnings, because those are the areas that teachers and out-of-school time program coordinators would say they struggle with the most, right? Is creating personalized learning opportunities for their students and also making activities as interactive as they can be. And also adding a lot of creativity into those activities, especially if you're reusing the same curriculum or you're reusing the same type of program year after year. Now, the majority of tools out there, including ChatGPT, are based on large language models. So there's a type of technology that's kind of like the basis for ChatGPT, and I'll give a really brief, simple introduction to this in just a few slides. But broadly speaking, large language models are the drivers of a lot of these artificial intelligence tools, and this is what you'll see in a lot of tools that are part of the education world. And then specifically for STEM, I think that there's starting to be a lot more use of AI in STEM programs. For a couple of reasons. I think one, it makes it easier for folks that do not have a STEM background to create dynamic STEM activities, right? This is true, especially in out-of-school time programs, because a lot of folks that are leading these programs are either younger students or young career professionals that may not have a STEM background. And so these tools have made it really easy to coordinate a summer-long or week-long program and just incorporate a couple of STEM activities by including a couple of prompts in ChatGPT. So there has really been a complete change in the way that we can approach education using AI tools. And specifically for out-of-school time programs and STEM, I think there's slowly starting to be a really important kind of change in or paradigm shift in the way that we can use these for those types of programs. So I think whatever our personal feelings about AI, it is being used in education, and it is changing the way we do things in a very important manner. Okay, so now we shift on to the tool that we're going to talk about today. And I will, again, preface this by saying that ChatGPT is only one AI tool available. There's many others that are now being developed. There's Gemini from Google, there's Pilot from Microsoft, there's a lot of other individual or specialized AI tools that we could have looked at. I decided to go with ChatGPT because it is the most well-known or the most common one out there. But you can apply a lot of the same concepts that we'll talk about today in some of those other tools as well. So similar to my first question, I want to get everyone's impressions on, or not impressions, but comments on what you know about ChatGPT so far. This can be, how does it work? Or how have you utilized it in the past? Especially if you're new to it, like what have been your first prompts that you've used to engage with ChatGPT? So Ben uses it primarily to edit emails and communications. Okay. Ben, do you do something like, put in an email and ask it to correct things kind of thing? No.
Yeah, usually I'll write a draft first and then I ask it to kind of help make it sound better.
Okay, amazing. Helpful for making lesson plans, great. Yeah. Oh, I have 2 comments about lesson plans. That's awesome. Proofreading and planning, writing emails, reports, letter recommendations. Okay, cool. Yeah, these are all great. I'm happy to see there's a couple that touch on education specific tasks. There's a lot of proofreading, writing, editing, including here fact checking. That's also a pretty good one. Yeah, I think these are some of the most commonly used the most common ways to engage with ChatGPT is asking ChatGPT to review work that's already been done and to make it more efficient, or to make it sound better, right? Or to provide some feedback in some way, whether that's proofreading or fact checking or something like that. I think those are the most common ways that folks would use ChatGPT, myself included. I do that a lot of the time. My wife does that a lot of the time as a graduate student. So definitely very common practice. Okay, so more proofreading. Great. Yeah. So these are all great, ways to engage with ChatGPT. Again, very common. I do wonder though if folks are familiar with, how ChatGPT works and why you're approaching this. Because while these are the most common ways to engage with ChatGPT, I have heard from a lot of folks that are way more knowledgeable about this than I am, that those are like the bare bones ways to engage with ChatGPT. I think in a lot of ways, the general public, and this was me when I first started using ChatGPT, would think of it as a better Google, right? Or a better Google search. So you would ask it to do similar things as you would ask Google, and just expect someone more refined or better results in the process. But ChatGPT is a lot more powerful. Really, any AI tool is a lot more powerful. And the reason for that is because it is built on a lot more information. So this is just a really brief kind of snippet into how ChatGPT or any large language model works, right? And why we get the type of answers we get. So the key thing here, the key thing with a large language model is that it is trained on a vast array of data sets, right? So when you use a search tool like Google, you're asking it to sort of in the morning give you responses as to what's available on the internet. But that tool might or might not be trained with the information that's already available on the internet. ChatGPT and other large language models are, on the other hand, already trained. So you're feeding it all of this information so that it recognizes patterns, ways to convey that information, ways that the information is organized, ways that the information is distributed across different topics, such that when you ask it to produce something, right? When you ask ChatGPT to give you a specific type of output, it does so in a way that replicates the databases that it was trained on, either replicating the patterns that it recognizes or the language that is being used or the information that is being provided, right? So that is really I think the technological breakthrough with ChatGPT and some of these tools is that it contains a lot more information, so it can pull from a lot of different places to provide you with the answers you're looking for. And so when we're thinking about using this with STEM education, tutoring, brainstorming, and lesson planning, ChatGPT is just not giving you, a couple of websites that it found on the internet. It is giving you information from thousands, if not millions, of other teachers. It's giving you information from thousands of other programs that are already out there that have created, these STEM activities for you, or not for you, but for their own programs, but that can now be reutilized for your specific setting. So when we're thinking about using ChatGPT, I think it's important to shift our conception of what it is, right? And to think of it not as a more efficient or a better Google, but really as a completely different tool, one that is much more powerful and that can provide us with a lot more information if we use the right prompts and we tell it to refine its answers and to refine the way that it provides information throughout that process. And we'll chat a bit more about how to do that in a few slides. I hope this is useful. It was really useful for me when I shift gears and I thought about ChatGPT in a different way, because that in turn has allowed me to engage with it in a much more effective way. And this is an example that I really like to use with anyone who was first introduced to ChatGPT or any other AI tool. And this is an example that worked for me as well, right? So let's say that you all are ChatGPTs, and I give you these 3 different number sets, right? And I tell you to basically read through these one by one for an entire hour. What would happen then if I told you to give me the 3 numbers that come after the number 30? What numbers would you give me? If you're looking at these 3 data sets and I'm asking you to remember them or to read them over and over for about an hour. If I then tell you, okay, give me the same data set, but starting with the number 30, which numbers would you give me? And you can include in the chat. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Ben. It would be 30, 32, 34, 36, right? Couple of reasons for that. One, it follows the same pattern that's already included here, right? It's every 2 numbers. Could be because it's looking at, an addition of 2 after each previous number, right? Or it is simply copying the individual number that's after the first one, right? Or just changing a 2 for a 3 in that 4th line, right? So there's different ways for why that might happen. Now, if I were to tell you, give me the next number in each of these lines, which numbers would you give me? So for the first line, what would be the next number? Yeah, perfect. And then for the next line, Ben, you're really assisting with this. 18. Yep. And then for the last one, amazing. 28. Yes. Right. So at that point, it is not simply recognizing a pattern, but it is predicting the next stage of that pattern because it has been trained on this data set. So that is essentially what ChatGPT and a lot of AI tools do. You train them on a specific data set. And so when they provide an output, they are trying to do a couple of different things. They're predicting a pattern. They're predicting a similar pattern, for a different type of answer, a different type of data set, right? So that is, again, the really cool thing about ChatGPT is just the way that it provides information is built on a lot more analysis of data than just here is what's available on the internet. So I think this is always useful to use, again, to conceptualize what is taking place. Okay. So this is, just a snippet of how I believe AI can be used in STEM programs. And this is not an exhaustive list, right? There's, I think, a lot more important points to include here than just these few. But like I said before, I think there's some ways that AI has revolutionized education, and specifically for out-of-school time STEM programs, I think it can accomplish a few different things. One, I think it can help a lot with self-paced learning and curiosity. If nothing else, ChatGPT and a bunch of other AI tools are really interesting to just play around with, right? as a technological tool, if we're thinking about the T in STEM, right, it would be great to just give students the opportunity to explore the types of outputs that ChatGPT can give you using specific prompts, using ways to refine those prompts, right? That's a great way to just explore how data is analyzed and conveyed, right, in different ways. Another great way that AI could be used in out-of-school time STEM programs is by providing instant explanations and problem-solving support. So this is, again, something that differs significantly from Google, where if you were to, ask Google to provide you with an answer to a specific question, it might redirect you to a website, whereas ChatGPT might provide you with a list, not only of potential answers to that question, but also link to websites and additional ways to explore that question, right? So a lot more powerful. Some of you had already talked about lesson planning. That's a really big one, right? Again, ChatGPT takes all of the lessons that are out there already and brings them together to create something that is of use for you in your classroom. So under specific settings or conditions or parameters, right? And that also includes, STEM project brainstorming as well. If you have a specific STEM project in mind that you would like to accomplish with your class, ChatGPT is a really good tool to use to kind of get at least some ideas going for those projects. And I think I also mentioned creativity, right, and engagement. I think that's another really good reason to use artificial intelligence and in out-of-school time STEM programs, and really any type of program, because it provides not only some additional ideas that you can pursue, but also it might give you an idea that you hadn't thought about initially, right? So think about a STEM project in the classroom or a STEM project over the summer, and you're given a specific topic to pursue, be it planets or being pollinators, right? ChatGPT may give you an idea about that project that you hadn't thought about initially, right? And then it doesn't lead you throughout the project necessarily, right? But you can move forward with that idea and explore it. And that enhances the amount of creativity that you can include as a part of that project. So I think there's a lot of important ways that we can utilize AI in our school time STEM programs. But again, not a super exhaustive list. Okay. Now, again, next question that it kind of goes back to the one that I had been talking before, that I had asked before, but this one is a lot more specific to, let's say, STEM programs, because that's the topic we're covering today, is STEM programs. So I wanted to ask for anyone here, how have you utilized ChatGPT specifically for STEM program development? And it can be ChatGPT or it can be, any other AI tool. How have you utilized it in the past? What type of prompts have you given it? It's totally fine if you said, I've never used it. I just want to get a baseline of the ways that folks have already interacted with ChatGPT specifically for STEM. Okay, Kayla hasn't traded yet. Awesome. What about everyone else?
I used Gemini when we were doing a STEM and soccer collaboration with the Forward Madison team. We had STEM stations that had to relate to soccer, and I needed to make them like elementary age specific because most of the ones I was finding were more like high school level. So I was able to put in there like that I was looking for something hands-on, and I was looking at, for it to be something for elementary school students, and yeah, came up with a few ideas.
Oh, that's awesome. Michelle, do you remember what type of prompts you gave ChatGPT?
I probably still have it saved. But I said like create, I was specific, I was saying create a lesson plan, a hands-on STEM lesson plan that, relates soccer to STEM skills. I'll find it, but yeah, I did put a little bit more information.
That's a really interesting example because you're trying to combine STEM with a non-STEM topic, right? And yeah, and that actually brings up a good point. That's another useful way to utilize ChatGPT or another one of these AI tools, is that you can combine different topics in ways that might not have been feasible to do using just Google search. So that's a really, really interesting one. Okay, so Ben has an AI coding and robotics class scheduled for the summer. Really cool. Okay, and we have a few younger folks that are helping their parents. Nikki, your daughter's helping you. That's amazing. With ChatGPT. And then for the most part, I think folks haven't specifically tried it for STEM, which is totally fine. Again, I mentioned before that AI tools like ChatGPT are just being utilized in STEM programming in ways like the one Michelle mentioned. So it's completely okay if folks here have not entirely engaged with it already. So I wanted to provide a couple of examples of how you can start using ChatGPT and specifically in STEM programs. Okay. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. The idea here is to give you a couple of prompts or types of prompts that you can use, and then you can expand on them as needed. Okay. So for instance, right, you can ask AI, be it ChatGPT, Gemini, or any other tool, for STEM activity ideas, right? One example of a prompt could be, give me a hands-on physics experiment for middle schoolers, right? That is, very specific. It goes directly to one type of activity, right? And you're also telling it to focus on a specific age group, right, or group of students. Another way to use ChatGPT is to ask it to explain scientific concepts in different ways. This is really, really useful, right? Especially if you don't have a STEM background and you're trying to, or even if you have a STEM background in a specific field and trying to explain STEM topics in different fields. It is really useful to have different ways to convey terminology for those different fields, right? Even for your own understanding. So another thing that you can ask ChatGPT to do is to explain scientific topics in different ways. For instance, you could tell it to describe photosynthesis in simple and advanced terms. You could even add to this prompt and say, describe photosynthesis for elementary school students, middle school students, high school students, college students, and adults. And it will give you a different explanation with different degrees of complexity for each of those age groups, right? Again, because that information has already been created somewhere, right? Under those specific terms, it can just pull from that available information and give it to you for use in your classroom. Another really, I think, interesting way that I've seen AI being used in STEM is to generate STEM challenges. So these might be, projects that you utilize in your classroom or as a part of an out-of-school time program. But if not, they're just like fun activities to do on your own time. For instance, you can ask ChatGPT to create a coding puzzle using Python for beginners. And this attempts to introduce you to Python as a coding language, right? So it serves as sort of an introduction to this particular topic in STEM. But it also does it in a way that is fun and engaging. And that's for potentially no other benefit than your own entertainment. So this I think is a unique way that you can use ChatGPT and that you might not find through just a simple Google search. Because if you do that, if you were to search through Google for fun STEM challenges or STEM activities, you might find some, you might not. It is more likely than not that you won't be able to find it for every STEM topic. I think I recall there's a few from NASA that are specific, STEM challenges, but those are very much related to astronomy and similar topics. So the great thing about ChatGPT is that it can take information from other STEM topics and change it in a way that is made into a challenge, a fun challenge for you to use. And then I think the last one that a lot of folks have already covered is assisting with research and writing. And this I think is more important for, in-class activities, if nothing else, for specific assignments. But you could, for instance, ask ChatGPT to summarize key facts about the solar system or key facts about any specific STEM topic. Or expand on those key facts, for a specific element of the solar system, right? And this might not, might not cover the entirety of that one specific topic, but it at least provides you with a jumping off point so that you can then do your own research or continue exploring this topic in different ways. So I think this is really useful for, say, students or out-of-school time STEM program coordinators that are struggling to understand the STEM topics they're working with. Doing something like this at least provides them with a template that they can then refer to in the future as they're going through the program or as they're going through class. So these are just some very simple prompts that I think anyone can start using today with ChatGPT or Gemini. And you can switch them so that they work for your specific classroom or your specific program. And you can also, switch a couple of terms here, words there to fit into any one particular STEM topic. So these I would recommend as some of the initial prompts that you work with, specifically when talking about STEM. But again, there's a lot more that you can use and a lot of ways to refine these as well. So I wanted to go through a sort of more in-depth example, right? Because I think it's useful in addition to just, being able to utilize these very simple prompts, right? I think it's also good to go through a more in-depth example of what you can do with ChatGPT. And I've actually included an output from ChatGPT at the bottom of this page for you to use, for you to view. So for instance, in this activity example, I am looking to use AI to generate science fair project ideas, right? Super common. Science fair projects are pretty ubiquitous amongst most schools. And I've also seen some out-of-school time STEM programs incorporate either science fair project-ish ideas or actual science fair projects as a part of their programs. So I think this is something that could be applied across a variety of different scenarios, right? And I've broken this down so that I explain exactly how I would utilize ChatGPT with my students and what each step of the design process would be by incorporating this tool. So step one, I would ask ChatGPT for project ideas based on a topic of interest to the students. In my case, I used the ChatGPT to come up with project ideas for pollinators because I'm interested in pollinators and I like pollinators. And it gave me the prompt at the bottom. In addition to that, you can, as a second step, you can ask ChatGPT or AI to provide step-by-step experiment instructions. So how are you going to carry out this experiment, right? What materials do you need? When do you need to go through each step? Are there any time constraints you need to be, aware of, right? And that is also something that I received after asking ChatGPT for that information in the example that I've included at the bottom of the slide. So not only do I have a specific question that I'm pursuing that has to do with pollinators as part of my project, but I also have the methods that I can utilize to actually complete that project. And I wasn't able to include all of the steps in those methods, but I included the first three just to get an idea. So at this point, in theory, after completing step 1 and 2, you could just do the experiment and you would be able to present it at the science fair. But to make it a bit more interesting, you can go to step 3 and you can ask students to modify their experiments with their own creativity. So either changing elements of what ChatGPT has already provided or going back to ChatGPT and asking it to modify the experiment under specific conditions, right? So you could say, modify the method you just gave me based on time of day, right? If I were using my own example with the pollinators, I could say, modify this so that it fits specific types of bees, specific species of bees, or that it works with specific types of gardens or plant species, right? So there's ways to modify it so that it shows the student's creativity, and you can choose to do that with or without ChatGPT. And then you could discuss the results of the experiment, right? And reflect on how AI was useful as a part of this process. And you could even incorporate AI into this reflection process by asking it to potentially analyze some of the data that you collected from the experiment, to provide you with data or information from other similar experiments that have been carried out in different contexts so you can compare and contrast with your own, right? There's ways to do that, but you can even incorporate that reflection step as a part of that process. So this again, is meant to provide just a general idea of something that you can do. But it is a very simple set of instructions and simple set of tasks that you can accomplish. And though it seems, fairly straightforward, it is actually super powerful to just incorporate, to just do something like this, because you already have so much information provided to you that it really allows for you to focus on, expanding your students' creativity or expanding their interests, or even supporting you as you're supporting your students in their projects, right? So I wanted to provide this so that everyone has, a more detailed example that they can go with. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, and I want to see if I can accomplish this somewhat more effectively. Let's see. Ooh, there we go. Okay, I wanted to do sort of a live example of this. So I'm going to ask someone, let's go with the first person in the chat. Let's go through the activity with the science fair project. Okay, so I'm going to ask someone to give me a prompt for ChatGPT based on the science fair project that has to do with your own interest in the field of STEM. And then we're going to kind of go through this step-by-step process that I mentioned before and see what we get. And that way we can all, see how ChatGPT provides us with those answers. And this is my own ChatGPT account that I've created. You need to create one on your own if you want to use it, but it's super straightforward and simple to do. So who wants to provide me with a prompt? So it could be like, create science fair project ideas for X topic. Okay, so there's a lot of really good ones, and I'm going to go with yours. So we are going to ask ChatGPT to create an activity for a third grade class based around Earth Day. So not specific to science fair projects, but it's totally okay. We are, Earth Month. Yes, we're in Earth Month after all. So this is very appropriate. We'll see what it gets. Okay. So it gives you a title for the activity that you can utilize, gives you an overview of what the activity is going to do. The cool thing about ChatGPT 2 is that it gives you learning objectives, and you can ask for this or not, right? And I will say sometimes it gives them to you, sometimes it doesn't. But when it does, it's really useful because you can actually refer back to these objectives as needed. So you have learning objectives, you have the materials you would need, which is great, super useful. And then you have the activity instructions, right? So you could, in essence, just take this and go with it in your class or in your out-of-school time program and incorporate this activity, right, throughout that process. Now, you already have this, so you could choose to go just with this. Or, for instance, you can ask it to refine it. So let's say, change the parameters of the activity so that we can utilize it with adults. Maybe you want to incorporate families, or maybe you want to incorporate caregivers as part of this, right? So now you're giving ChatGPT different parameters, and then there we go. Gives you essentially the same type of activity, right? Again, learning objectives and materials. But now the detailed activity instructions might change a little bit to fit in with those new parameters, right? They might change significantly, if those parameters change a lot. We're not going to go through these step-by-step as a compare and contrast basis, but I would imagine that some of the activities here might be a little bit more complex or might require a bit more energy or lifting heavier things, right? Because we are working with adults now. But that is something that you could do, right? And then you can ask to see, show me results from similar projects carried out in the Midwest. This part of that reflection stage. Oh, interesting. Uh-huh. So we've asked ChatGPT to provide us with some, okay, so with some results from similar projects. And because it was tailored for our specific parameters, there's not a lot of similarities, or there's not a lot of similar projects out there that they could pull from. So instead, what it is trying to do is show us, similar activities that have been carried out in other places. So, for instance, it's showing us right now the description of the Chicago Earth Day mural and recycled art workshop that was carried out, I assume, somewhere in Chicago, right? And what the project impact was and what came out of this, right? There's also an example for a similar project in Minneapolis. So while these are not exactly like the type of projects that you ask ChatGPT to create for you, they are still useful comparisons. So if you were to say, okay, compare your results of the project to similar projects that have been carried out elsewhere, you could use these as an example. And you could also use these as a jumping off point to do your own research referring to these specific projects. So there's a lot of things that you can do here. Okay, so, there we go. Let's go back to the slide. Cool. So I wanted to go through that just to get an idea of, again, what you can do with ChatGPT. We asked ChatGPT to provide a specific type of activity. We asked ChatGPT to refine it under specific parameters, and we asked it to provide information so that we can use as part of the reflection process of that activity. So again, super powerful, super useful to use. And that same process can be adapted in a variety of different ways, depending on what it is you want to accomplish. Okay, so now that we've covered, right, the basics of large language models and ChatGPT specifically, we've also gone through some of the basics of how you can use ChatGPT and what types of prompts you can utilize, and we actually carried out an example on this. Now we're on to the less great news about ChatGPT, or I would say some of the considerations that you should have as you're, employing this tool for your own classrooms or as part of your own out-of-school time programs. And again, this is not an all-exhaustive list. This is an ongoing conversation that AI experts are having, and that education experts are having, right, and that community experts are having, in terms of how to utilize ChatGPT and other AI-based tools. What are some of the best practices for that, right? And whether we should adjust our usage in specific ways, be it as a part of out-of-school time programs or for specific age grade levels. There's a lot of those conversations going on. But for the most part, these are, I think, some important limitations and ethical considerations to have as you're utilizing AI-based tools. So one, to recognize that not all the information that ChatGPT provides or other AI tools provide is accurate. Because you are pulling from pre-existing information, and because the responses being generated by ChatGPT are based on that pre-existing amount of information, and because the new information is not independently generated, right? So there's no critical thinking behind what is being provided to you as a response. If that pre-existing information is flawed, then the response that ChatGPT is going to give you is going to be flawed as well. So that is something to consider, that even though this is a really powerful tool and you can do a lot with it, you should always double check that information that is provided to you to ensure that it is accurate, and that it fits in what you want to do in class. For instance, it would be terrible for my science fair project on pollinators if ChatGPT gave me really bad information about pollinators or completely outdated information about pollinator biology or pollinator ecology. So it's always good to double check information as you're working through or as you're working with ChatGPT. Another thing to consider is that extreme usage of ChatGPT has been associated with lack of critical thinking, specifically in yes, in student populations, but really any type of usage of AI. involves to a certain point that degree of inaccurate information, right? And so if we were to take it at face value, that could be that can negatively impact our work, right? So we want to avoid that lack of critical thinking as a part of that process. And so it is important for you to make sure that you teach your students to fact check AI generated content, right? And for any group you work with, to fact check AI generated content and to make sure that you are thinking critically about the information that is provided to you and the information or any resources that are being provided to you through ChatGPT. You want to avoid falling into that trap of lack of critical thinking by assuming that everything that ChatGPT provides for you is accurate and the best available information. So this goes kind of hand in hand with the not always accurate limitation here. It's also important to recognize that there is a lot of bias in AI responses. Again, because all of the responses from any AI-based tool are based on pre-existing information, the biases that have been contained within that pre-existing amount of information, those are going to be represented in the outputs from ChatGPT. So just recognize that. There is a lot of data available, for instance, on how ChatGPT and other AI-based responses tend to favor specific demographic groups or don't consider, specific characteristics or lived experiences of other demographic groups in the responses, right? So it is important to recognize that this will show up as a part of the output that ChatGPT provides for you. So it is important for you to double check that information again and to make sure that, for instance, if you're working with a specific demographic group, that the information that is being provided to you by ChatGPT is appropriate, right? And relevant and culturally relevant to that group as well. And then there's also, as with any use of technology, there's privacy and safety issues. ChatGPT and other tools like Gemini have gone a long way in, for instance, not saving the prompts that you give them, or not saving your information outright, right? But I think it's a good reminder to always have a set of ethical guidelines to refer to as you're using ChatGPT and other AI-based tools. Make sure that you're protecting yourselves and your students from having their information or data shared as you're utilizing these tools, and to make sure that you want to avoid exposing anyone to negative or inappropriate information, right? And I haven't included any specific ethical guidelines here, but there's a lot available online that you can refer to, and I'm also happy to provide links to that as well after this workshop. But that is something to consider, but I think it's also good practice anytime you're using technology in any way. Okay, and so now that we've covered some of those ethical limitations, I think we can sort of shift focus as to the best practices for using AI. And this, kind of builds on those limitations and things to consider. But I think it's also just best practice so as to make the most out of this tool and to not think of it as a replacement for actually, providing that educational content to your students or to your program participants. So one thing to consider is to make sure that you're using AI as a teaching assistant, not a replacement, right? Because of all of the things we talked about in the previous slide, inaccurate information, bias, all of that, AI is meant to be a tool that you can use, but is not meant to replace the information that you can provide and the critical thinking that you can include as a part of providing that information. So very important to distinguish between those two things. Encourage your students to question and verify AI responses. Again, we talked about this in the previous slide. Important as part of their own critical thinking exercises, but also just a good way to ensure that, again, they're looking at AI as a tool, not as an educational replacement. Also great to blend AI activities with hands-on learning. So, we talked about how AI can provide examples of activities to use in the classroom. Make sure that those activities do not involve other technological tools or AI, right? You could, in theory, do something like ask ChatGPT to provide you with an activity to do with ChatGPT, and it will give it to you. But probably not the best way to, incorporate other types of learning as a part of this process. I think it's always good to have both sides of the coin present, and to avoid using AI or AI-based tools as the end-all be-all for learning in the classroom or as part of out-of-school time programs. And then introducing AI literacy for your students or for your program participants is always great. So teaching them how AI works is, I think, a good first step. Providing some of those basics that we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, I think, is always good as well. That way, when you're saying, take care to double check this information, or just know there's some bias involved, they understand why that bias might be included, right? Why would ChatGPT give you an output with bias? Well, that's because it's being trained on all this available information, and that information has bias. But understanding that process is important. So these are just some best practices to keep in mind as you're utilizing AI and STEM programs. And then I wanted to sort of to end this presentation with just a brief look into what the future of AI and STEM education may be. I included a question mark here because this is still a very much evolving field. And so, you're probably going to see a lot of these tools kind of like creeping up now. And so there's a lot of talk about AI tools being used as virtual tutors and interactive simulators. There's a lot of talk about AI tools being used for personalized STEM learning, specifically STEM learning. There's already a lot of AI tools that are being utilized for curriculum development and assessment tools, but a lot more of those are now being shared and promoted, specifically to educators. And I think one important thing to consider too is that as some of these tools become more widely available, that does mean that access to STEM education becomes more widely available as well. I think of all of these, the last point here, the access to STEM education worldwide, is something that I will think is going to happen, just because these tools are becoming more and more available. Those other points, I think, is always good to take with a grain of salt, right? These are all great tools, but we don't really know how they're going to affect in-class, program delivery or out-of-school time program delivery. And so it's still, there's still room to evaluate and assess the effectiveness. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention these are all the tools that are now being promoted out there that you might see and that you might be aware of. So it's good to keep those in mind. And I included a couple of examples. CanMigo is, I think, the most common one. This is from Khan Academy, which is a really popular and well-known educational nonprofit. They came up with CanMigo as their own like personalized tutor, an AI learning tool. So if you're interested in exploring any one of these, I'd suggest looking at CanMigo, because that, I think, is the one that's been promoted the most and the one that's been worked on the most. So interesting tool for sure. Okay, so that's it for me. I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions and discussion at the end of the session, but thank you all so much for spending the last 15 minutes with me and for chatting through some of these AI specific questions, and for also indulging me with some of the activities during this presentation.
So thank you, Bernie. If anyone has any questions, we have just a few more minutes before we need to sign off. You can either put those in the chat or you can unmute and we can take your questions live. I will say before everyone signs off, though, I do have a survey, a little quiz that I would like to launch for you, I hope. Let's see.
And as Jill is going through this, I will also say, sort of to close everything off, if there's no questions, that's totally fine. Also happy to chat offline as well. But remember that the Wisconsin Out of School Time Alliance does provide technical assistance support for STEM program development. So if you want to learn more about how to use AI tools as part of your programs or any other type of assistance for STEM program development, please be sure to go to WASTA's website and ask for that assistance. You will be put in touch with a STEM education consultant, be it me or someone else, to help with those ideas. So I'd be happy to be connected with you and help in any way I can.
And the survey should launch once we are done, so that should do that. But I do want to say thank you again, Bernie, for this great information. Like you mentioned, this is a great tool to start playing with, so I hope folks kind of go out there and do that. I also want to thank all of you for joining us today and the work that you do on behalf of children and families in the state of Wisconsin. I hope that you have an opportunity in the next couple of weeks to utilize some of this information and these tools and share with others what you are learning. You are welcome. I did put in the chat our WASTA website, so you are welcome to go there and look at any other professional development opportunities. In addition to this series, we've got some others on the website. And if you are interested in being added to our listserv, you can subscribe to that and get additional information based on other topics. Thank you all so very much for joining us today.